it's Girls Camp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girls Camp podcast. I'm your host, Haley Rawl, and I am joined today by the lovely Holly Graff.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm so excited you're here. I have been meaning for a long time, I actually don't think I've told you this, but I have been really wanting to interview someone who went to BYU, the biggest Mormon church school in Provo, Utah, as a non-believer. And I was on TikTok, and one of your TikToks came across my feed where you were talking about that experience. So you just graduated in April, right? From
Yes.
BYU. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
On many levels. Congratulations.
Yeah.
And you were not believing for about 2 years while going to school, would you say?
Yeah, 2.5. Yeah, I'd say that.
About 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And then how long were you dating women while you were at BYU?
Probably about the same, like
Okay.
2.5.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is going to be such a good conversation. You have such a cool story. I'm so excited to get into it all. And we're going to be talking about what it's like mentally, what it's like practically to be attending a church school while not believing, and then also while dating women. And I think that probably adds a whole extra layer. Can't wait to get into it. The first thing I want to ask is, why are you motivated to share publicly about that experience?
Yeah, I had the idea to post a TikTok about it probably a few months before I graduated. I think I got to a point where I was like, I'm so close to being done, but I had friends, or I just like hear people who still have years ahead of them, and that it just makes me like so sad for them. And then also I was talking to this lady, and she was telling me, she's like, I know this person who's gay at BYU, and they like really think they're the only one. Like they really think they're the only person who's like struggling at BYU. And like I heard that and I was like, that's crazy, because I know so many people who are either queer or just like don't believe anymore. And so I just wanted to like put it out there that like there are other people, because I think that's so encouraging while you're there.
Absolutely. I mean, we're going to get into all of this. You have like very practical tips to share as well, which that's a whole thing, why there even needs to be all these practical tips, literally just how to like survive it. But to your point as well, I think because of the way BYU works, where you are basically forced into believing or pretending to believe, probably everyone just assumes that everyone else around them does believe.
Yeah, totally.
Until you're able to like find slowly like that safety net. So I think that it's really, really cool that you're sharing that for those reasons.
Thank you.
Don't want to get ahead of myself. Before we dive into all the BYU stuff, can you just give us a background on your Mormon upbringing, where you're from, what Mormonism was like for you growing up?
Yeah, so I'm from Orem, so I've lived in Utah County my whole life. And I wouldn't say there's anything really, I don't know, like remarkable about my childhood. I think it's pretty standard growing up in the church. My parents weren't like super intense. Like we definitely went to church, we did all the things, but they kind of let us like, I never felt like they wouldn't love me if I wasn't like fully in the church. So I'm really grateful for that. But yeah, I was really in it, like all throughout high school, everything. My plan was always to go on a mission after my first year at BYU. Going to BYU was always like a really big thing for me. So that was like my goal growing up.
Yeah. Why do you
So-
think that was? Why were you so set on BYU?
I mean, I think part of it is just because I grew up in Utah County. That's like the thing. I feel like it's like there's this idea that it's like if you're smart enough, you go to BYU. And if you don't get in, then you go to like UVU.
100%. Yeah.
Which UVU is a great school. But I think it was that all my sisters went, my parents went. Like it was just like that's what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the BYU thing, I've been reflecting on this, preparing for this interview. And let's maybe give a quick lay of the land for people who don't know. But there's BYU Provo, and that is like BYU proper, Brigham Young University. That's kind of like the holy grail of church schools. Then they also have an Idaho campus, BYU Idaho, and then BYU Hawaii, a Hawaii campus. And then the only other church school is a random school in West Virginia, I think, or SVU, I think it's called,
yeah.
South Virginia?
I don't know what
No,
state
I
it's
should
in.
have looked it up. Anyway, that's like, I mean, it's a church school as well, but like super small campus. So I feel like growing up as a Mormon person, especially in Utah County, a lot of people have their sights set on attending BYU. BYU is also very, very cheap to attend compared to other schools. I mean, I had the same experience. I think for me, I did consider for a while like going out of state, but BYU also just makes a lot of sense for people who grew up in Utah. If you're like a Mormon person, you're wanting to go on a mission, it's like BYU is kind of the way to go.
Yeah.
So you get into BYU. Mm-hmm. I feel like I want to start with this journey of like being at BYU and faith crisising. Because also for those who don't know, in order to attend BYU, there are parameters in place to make sure that you are a believing member and that you are doing the whole Mormon church lifestyle. So at what point during your education at BYU do you feel like you started questioning things?
Yeah. I mean, I would say pretty immediately I just had like small questions, I guess. I mean, I think like my freshman year, I was still very into it. I was still like planning on going on a mission, but I got to BYU and I just saw things like that was the year that the people lit up the Y, for, like the rainbow Y.
Yeah.
And I was still
That
like,
was your freshman year.
Yeah, I was still like fully in the church, but like seeing BYU's response to that and like people's reactions, I was like, this is like kind of yucky. Like,
what did BYU say? I can't remember.
I can't remember what they say, but they said they like released a statement that was basically like, we didn't have anything to do with this.
We don't condone it.
That. Yeah.
Because was it during Pride Week or something? People just lit the Y up with rainbow lights as like a Pride Week thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I thought was awesome.
Yeah.
I wasn't out yet, but I was like, that seems really cool.
Yeah. You're like, I like that.
And then like that was BYU's response. And it was just like a bunch of little things like that where I think in my head, I was still like, well, like it's not the church necessarily. It's just like, you know, whatever. But then like, I think some part of my brain was like kind of like just like keeping these things in my head. Like that's kind of like a weird thing that the church's school is like doing that. I think by my second year at BYU, I was living with a girl who she was a little bit more, she was still in the church, but she was a little bit more like, I don't want to speak for her, but maybe like questioning or just like open to new ideas. And I feel like that was the first experience where I was like really close to someone who just like let me like share my thoughts without feeling like judged by them at all. So I think by that year, like I was going to church a little less. When I did go to my YSA ward, I mean, you know how YSA wards are, just like crazy things would be said. And I'd be like, this is like really weird.
YSA wards are particularly weird culture because YSA stands for young single adult. I feel like a lot of that weirdness, I'm curious your thoughts on it, but a lot of it stems from the fact that everyone is so anxious to get married. Do you feel like that's like the bulk of where that weirdness is coming from?
I do, because I feel like a majority of like the talks and the testimony, everyone's just trying to like be silly or like just try to like get a little something.
They're trying to like show off almost.
Yes. And so like people would just say things and I'd be like, I don't know. It's just like kind of uncomfortable. And then even like the bishopric, I feel like was sometimes like just saying weird stuff. Like it was very rare that I'd come away from church and be like, I feel like so uplifted. We talked about Jesus. He was always like, I just heard some like weird story and like, I don't know.
Yeah, it makes sense too, because I feel like one of the good things about going to church when you're in like a family ward is like you're just around the community. You're around kids and you're around older people. And I feel like that's a beneficial thing just generally, like take the church out of it. But when it's the young single adult wards, you're just around peers your age that you're already going to school with, that you already live by. So it doesn't have the same benefits, I feel like, maybe as a family ward. And yeah, then people are trying to show off. People are trying to get married. And I feel like those leaders of those wards are probably much more focused on talking about law of chastity stuff, like don't have sex, but do get married. It's just like a very particular culture. So I can see how I remember that in my first young single adult ward, just being like, this is really weird. So yes, makes sense.
Yeah. And I think also like probably At this point, I definitely knew some part of me was into girls. I was trying to figure it out. But I think that was a weird thing too, where like so many of the lessons are focused on like eternal marriage and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't think I want to marry a man. I mean, I didn't know exactly how I felt, but there was definitely some like internal conflict where I was like, this just doesn't feel right to me. And it feels so like narrow.
Yes. It's like the epitome of heteronormativity and like traditional nuclear family is like what's being pushed.
Yes. And it's like the most invalidating thing to hear, like marriage between a man and a woman is like the path to happiness and just like this. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, well, you're literally like point blank excluding me and so many other people. So how am I supposed to just like walk away from this and be like, what a true church?
Yes, totally. So you're friends with that roommate of yours. She's questioning. You're going to church. You're kind of like, I'm not necessarily fucking with this.
Yeah.
How did it feel to be at BYU, to be at the church school? I mean, there's so many things that come up with feeling like a faith crisis coming on or starting to question things. How did it feel to be questioning things in and of itself? And then what was that added layer of being like, oh, well, but I'm at BYU and I have a couple years left to like get through my education?
Well, I feel like at first it was actually like fine. At first it really didn't feel like a crisis at all for me. Like it really was the first time I felt like I was like really coming into myself. And I felt like actually like really confident and like I was making my own decisions. So I really felt good at first. And then I had like other experiences, which I don't know if we want to get into now or later, but that just made me feel like, oh, like I'm really on rocky ground with this and I have to be really careful how I move forward.
Yeah. Let's talk about those experiences.
Okay. Yeah.
Because that makes sense. I mean, just to tie a bow on that, that's why I've been just so fascinated by talking to you and your experience, because when I faith crisised, it's like, okay, I obviously have to eventually tell my family. And I mean, you're still experiencing the things that come with that. But I just imagine being at BYU, you would feel this added layer of like, oh, but I'm kind of trapped in this culture, at least for some time. So yes, I would love to hear when that friction started happening.
I think when it really started to go awry for me was a particular ecclesiastical endorsement I had. By this time, me and my roommate hadn't really been going to church that much. We'd go every once in a while just because we had to. But it was time to get ecclesiastical endorsements, and
let's put a pin before we jump into the story and what an ecclesiastical endorsement is.
It's such a mouthful.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I had to do it too. I'm sure it hasn't changed much, but basically it is a worthiness vetting process where you have to go into your local leader, the bishop of your ward, and you have to prove to them essentially that you still believe the church is true, that you're keeping the word of wisdom, you're not drinking, you're not doing drugs, and that you're going to church, that you're like physically attending church.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just
exactly.
like, it's basically like getting a temple recommend, which I just talked about on last week's episode, but it's so that you are still worthy to attend BYU.
Yeah, exactly.
And do they renew those every year? Is it once a year? Okay.
Yeah.
So within that year, you had your endorsement, and then, you know, you're questioning things, you're not going to church as much, and now you have to go prove that, you know, you have to go talk to your bishop in order to continue attending the school that you're going to, that you're currently enrolled in.
Yeah.
It's so crazy.
It's the worst.
So your endorsement is coming up. You've been attending church pretty sporadically.
Yeah. And the endorsements I had before this were all pretty chill, I guess. Like, I think a lot of bishops, it's like so many people come in and out of the wards. It's like they don't know who's who. You answer the questions right, let's give it to you. So that's kind of what I was like thinking going into this. But me and my roommate had this plan beforehand. We're like, just in case he asks like why we haven't really been coming, he won't. Our plan was like she had some cousins nearby, so she's like, I'll say like I help them on Sundays with their kids, and then I was like, I'll just say I go to my parents' home ward because it's so close. So we're not gonna have to use this plan. So we go in. She has her interview before me. I have mine right after hers. So she goes in. I can hear, the walls are so thin. I can hear everything from the outside.
You're just listening.
Yeah, I'm just fully listening, like word for word. And she goes in and he's immediately like, so you haven't really come to church. And I'm like starting to panic a little bit. And he's like, so I can't give you your endorsement. And I'm like sitting outside that room, just like starting to panic. And so she like goes into the
She has her whole spiel ready,
yeah.
thank goodness.
And he's just like not really buying it. And he's just like grilling her, like all these questions, asking if she has sex, if she's gay, if she has gay friends who are influencing her, just like literally asking her every question. And I'm like sitting out there. And also the bishop's like secretary, like they'll call a student in the ward to like plan his meetings and stuff. He's sitting right outside the door. So I'm like, this 19-year-old boy is also hearing word for word this interview. So they were in there for 2 hours and he's just like grilling her. And I'm like,
such a long time.
Yeah, I'm outside the door just like planning what I'm going to say. So she walks out. She doesn't know that I can hear everything. So she just like looks at me. So I go in and my interview was a little bit easier because, I mean, I had 2 hours to plan. And I just really played up like I'm kind of like a little bit shy. Like I feel more comfortable going to my parents' ward. But even still, he was like, you really need to be coming here. I can't give you your endorsement. Basically, he said, like, if you come for the rest of the summer and come talk to me every week, by the end of the summer, I'll give it to you.
Oh my gosh.
So I was like, okay. And he's like, but if you stop coming after I give it to you, I won't hesitate to take it away. This next thing he said was like my distinct breaking point from the church. He's like, I really won't hesitate to do it. Last year, there was a boy who stopped coming after I gave it to him. And I took his away and he started laughing. He's like, and I don't know what happened to him. And I was just like looking at this old man who's like judging my worthiness to be at school, just laughing at the fact that he probably like ruined this boy's life. And I was like, this whole thing is so fucked up. I want nothing to do with this. I don't know how my interview was also 2 hours. I think I like blacked out. I don't know what we talked about. I got out of there at 11 p.m. No one's in the building. It's just me and this bishop.
How old is this bishop? I'm curious his demographic. I'm assuming white dude.
White dude, lives in Provo, probably 70.
Oh, an old guy.
Yeah, he was pretty old.
Okay.
And I think for him too, because he told me in the interview, he's like, I can't remember what his job was, but he's like, I really regret like the job I chose. I really don't feel fulfilled. So like, that's why I love this calling. Like it gives me some fulfillment. I'm like, okay, go do something. I don't know.
Especially those guys. I was thinking about this too when I first heard your story about these ecclesiastical endorsements. There's a ton, obviously, of Mormon kids going to these church schools. So they have to just basically be taking people from Provo, Orem, like Utah County. They take them out of their family wards to go be bishoprics of these student wards. Like I had an uncle who did it. I think my grandpa did it for a while. I mean, the church needs a lot of these men to like run the show because they're the only ones apparently that can do it. It just creates, I think, also like an interesting group of people, though I think any bishop, that is happening anyway. But yeah, it makes sense that they're just like, any 70-year-old man who's still going to church and is still married, they're probably like, come be a bishop of a BYU ward. And he's like, this is the best day of my life that I can have power over these like college kids.
Yeah. And I think too, what's so clear about this experience is like, I mean, I went to church every week. I shook his hand every week. I talked to him. And by the end of it, when he gave me my endorsement finally, it wasn't like, okay, like, how are you doing? Have you felt comfortable here? Or even in the interview, it wasn't like, okay, so how can we make you feel more comfortable at church? Like, how can we make you want to come? It was just like, you have to come. And then he gives it to me. And it wasn't like, okay, how are you doing? It was like, he said, don't you feel like so good now that you've been coming? And I just like gave it. I was like, yeah, it's great. But like, you clearly don't care at all how I'm actually doing. You just want the numbers, I guess. I don't know. Or to like feel like you saved me. I don't know.
Yes. Like it's only about conformity and obedience. And he felt probably really good that he took it very seriously to make sure that you were coming to church because that's what he's been told to do, as opposed to, oh, why is this person maybe not feeling comfortable here? Or what is this person experiencing or going through? Or how can we make it more safe or welcoming? I don't think that's, I mean, not for everyone. Certainly, I hope that there are some leaders of the church who feel that way, but I've had many, many experiences with leaders like that who it's just like, they don't care. They just want you to come. Yeah. And I don't even think they care so much what you even believe. They just are like, well, this is what you have to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So you had to go to church that whole summer. How was that? What was that like?
It was terrible. I don't know what the psychological reasoning behind this is, but before this, I'd been feeling so good. I'd been feeling confident. I never got anxious. And then right as this happened, I was getting the worst anxiety. Going to church, I just feel sick. And I was like, okay, I just have to get through it. It's just I'm nervous about getting my endorsement. But I got the endorsement, and afterward I was still no, I'm just as anxious as I was before. So I don't know exactly what it triggered, but yeah, going to church was terrible. Having to talk to him was just that was the worst part. He just was kind of an icky man to me. And I was like, I don't like that I have to come and personally interact with you every week. He was dangling something over my head.
It's a weird hostage-y situation.
It was so weird.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was definitely a rough time for sure.
I bet. I want to ask this now, and I don't feel this way at all. I actually think the answer should be fairly clear. But I do know some people will still say, well, why didn't you just switch schools? You didn't have to go to BYU. You could have just transferred, and then you wouldn't have had to do any of this. Mm-hmm. What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. I think one, the program I was in was going to be really difficult to switch, because at this time, me and that roommate were both trying to think ahead. So we're okay, if we transferred, where would we go? And for her, it was well, if I transfer to the U, it'll add a semester, but I can just take these classes there. But for me, I was in this design program. So it's if I transferred, I'd have to apply to a design program at a different school. And it's usually you have to go through the whole thing. So that was really tricky. Also, just religion credits do not transfer at all.
And you have to take a lot of religion credits. How many do you end up having to take? I can't remember.
I want to say it's 14 credits.
Yeah, so that's a lot. That's a lot of classes that would basically just be going entirely to waste. Mm-hmm. And money going to waste too.
Well, and then there was the pressure of, I didn't know how my parents would react to it. I like to think that they would be understanding, but I'm I don't know how they're going to react if I come to them and I'm hey, I didn't get my endorsement, or I don't believe in this, I'm going to transfer. And they helped me pay for school. So that was a whole thing that I had to worry about. And then also I just I really had built a pretty good community at BYU. So I'm that's hard to just leave.
Totally.
Depending on where I go. And then I think the other thing I think of, especially when people are someone commented on my TikTok and they're you wasted our tithing money. I hope they take away your degree, whatever. But I think what I'd say for that is I think people think students who don't believe, they're just taking everything from BYU. It's gimme. But I like to think I kind of gave a lot more than I got. I was a really good student. I was...
Snaps to that. Yeah,
I
sure
was
you did.
Quite frankly, a really good student employee. And I feel I was underpaid. And I published research papers. I feel I put a good name out for BYU. So I feel that's another thing where everyone's well, you shouldn't. It's well, I'm kind of helping you out by I did internships. I'm making a good name for BYU, and I'm kind of not getting that much.
You're not just sucking resources to do it. Oh, on so many levels, you articulated so many facets of why it is so silly for people to say that. Not even to mention, you grew up Mormon. You paid your tithing.
Yeah, exactly.
My parents
are
paid
paid tithing. Yeah.
I think about this a lot when people say that, because first of all, the church has $300 billion. Literally. So on that level, it's already irrelevant. But if people are really feeling up in arms that of all the places the church is putting their tithing, if they're upset that it's going to students who are at BYU, that's crazy in and of itself. But your parents have paid your tuition multiple times over by paying their tithing. And I think it's just so important to underscore how unfair it is to say to someone well, just transfer, because of all those reasons you mentioned. it's massively inconvenient. If anything, it's just a massive inconvenience. There's money to consider. There's the amount of time to consider. There's the fact that you're just well into your college degree. And like, that's not an easy thing to do, to just switch. And I think it's so misguided when people say that, because the issue is not students going to BYU and then losing their faith. The issue is, if a student loses their faith at BYU, then they're forced into an impossible situation.
Yeah.
Where they either have to lie or they have to do the massive inconvenience. Sometimes it's probably not even possible for people to transfer due to finances or what have you. And it's just it lacks so much compassion and also critical thinking, I think, when people say that.
Yeah. Well, and it's so frustrating too, because it's like, you're like early 20s and like college years, that's such a time to find yourself. And so the fact that there's no space for it, it's like you're in this box and it's like, well, if you change, you're in the box already. Like you can't change shapes, but it's like, but I'm 20 years old. Like, of course I'm going to change. So I think that's also so frustrating.
Absolutely. And it's also basically agreeing, when you get accepted to BYU, to be Mormon for the next 4 years at an incredibly pivotal time in your life when you are going to change a lot. Any person between, depending when you go to BYU, between 18 and 25, you should change. You should change a lot. And so to hold someone to, well, you agreed to do these things when you first signed up, so now you have to stay the exact same, is so unreasonable.
Yeah.
And I also didn't even think about, you mentioned this as well. This has been on my mind because I did an episode about temple sealings, where a lot of people just got sealed in the temple because they weren't ready to tell their parents that they had left the church. And BYU seems like a similar situation where it took me like a year and a half to tell my family after I had like really fully gone out of the church. It took me a year and a half to tell my family, where in this situation, if you're at BYU, you would have to immediately tell them because you're transferring. Like, it just, on so many levels, I think there's so much to consider there. After you get that endorsement, you're still at BYU. I'm curious to hear first about what it was like taking classes at BYU. BYU makes you take religion classes. Mm-hmm. I mean, I heard some crazy things at BYU as a student and was still in a somewhat believing mindset. So once you've kind of realized, like, this isn't for me, you're coming to terms with your sexuality, starting to explore that. What was it like having to be subject to BYU and the professors there?
Yeah. I feel at least somewhat lucky. For some reason, I was like speed running my religion classes like my first couple years. I'd say like early days of starting to question things and like starting to date girls. Luckily, I only had like one religion class left. So that makes it a lot easier because the religion classes can just be wild. I had one my freshman year. I'm still fully believing. I'm still like kind of thinking I'm straight. And I wrote this essay, and it was basically not like me being upset with the church, but basically just like an essay of me questioning, like, we're kind of taught like God makes people how they are. So like if God makes gay people gay, how can it be a sin? Just like kind of like going through this like thought process in this paper. And my professor emailed me back after, and he was like, well, God also makes people with like mental disabilities and just like this weird reasoning. I was like, well, yeah, but that he doesn't say that's a sin. Like, just like there was no reasoning there. And I think just things like that, like anytime I would try to like pose a question, it was just always this like weird response that was like not helping me whatsoever.
So he was trying to push back and say, well, God also makes people with disabilities and we love them. But it's like, yeah, but that's also not like doctrine that they're not allowed to live their lives on their terms. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
so
try.
Just like weird stuff like that.
Also a full-blown professor having that sort of, I'm sorry, but lack of critical thinking. It's really bizarre when you're attending BYU, because I'm not even saying these people aren't smart people. I think obviously you have to get a PhD. You have to like qualify. But especially the religion professors who are very heavily into the religion, the doctrine, it's a very weird thing to witness, because it's like, you should be not thinking this way. Like, you're a
Exactly.
professor.
Yeah. like I'm
this-
an 18-year-old and I
Yeah.
feel like I'm thinking a little deeper about this.
Exactly.
But honestly, I would say the hardest part of going to BYU was not the classes. Like, I think for the most part, most of the professors I had were actually pretty good and like pretty accepting. And maybe it's just the classes I took and like the major I was in. But day-to-day classes were fine. It was more about, I mean, like church and endorsements and like administration and things like that. But I mean, yeah, quite frankly, going to class was usually pretty good.
It's so interesting to think about. I think about this a lot as someone who went to BYU, and also, you know, talking about these professors at BYU. I mean, I had really quite lovely experiences as well, for the most part, with my professors. I was in the English program, which I also think it's funny because you were talking about this being in the design program. You're like, my programs may be different. I kind of felt that way too, where I was like, I think English literature, like it maybe tends to attract a more progressive, nuanced type of person. So it probably does depend on the program. But I do see this really fairly big distinction between BYU faculty and professors versus BYU institution headquarters. And it's interesting to watch that play out. It was interesting when I went to BYU. And for context, I graduated BYU. Oh my gosh, I'm so bad with dates. It would have been probably, got home from my mission, like 2018, maybe. So it was well before you. And it sounds like from talking to you, that distinction has maybe even grown.
Yeah, I would guess so.
Do you get a feeling while you were attending BYU, was there ever like comments made? Like, did professors ever make it known that they disagreed with BYU in subtle ways or in straightforward ways?
Yeah, I would say I saw that a lot. Some more subtle than others. I think a lot of them tried to keep it on the down low because obviously they want to keep their jobs. I had one professor, and this was like, I don't know, one of the more impactful experiences at BYU, but he was talking to our class and he was basically just saying like, there were some strong-willed people in our class, I guess I'll say that, like people who were kind of frustrated with BYU. And so he like sat us all down and he said, quote, BYU is becoming more and more conservative every day. He's like, you guys really need to be careful. He was like, I get where you guys are coming from for sure, but just don't make any statements till you graduate. Just lay low, get out of here, and then you can do whatever you want. And that was like so crazy. Like I kind of knew he was like a more understanding, like progressive professor, but like that was just crazy because I was like, it was like such a warning. I mean, such a loving warning for us, but it's also crazy because it's like we will graduate and go, but it's like, this is his career. Like he's got to do this till he retires or finds another job.
I think about BYU professors a lot, and they're in the situation you were in, but in a even higher stakes way.
Yeah.
I think it would be easy to say like, just get a new job and you're supporting this institution that's obviously homophobic, racist, all the things. But the same way you were saying all of the reasons you couldn't just transfer schools, they're experiencing that, but they're also providing for their families. Like it's a really tricky situation to be in for a BYU professor, I can imagine, especially because some of them have been there for 20, 30 years. So we're talking about the changes you make in 5 years. You think about all of the changes not only they've probably made, but the church has also made. And they're in a really tricky situation. And on top of all of that, that professor saying that to you, that's a risk. That professor took a big risk by saying that. And thank goodness some of them will, because the students need it.
Yeah.
Because the students are struggling.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so interesting. I think the farther I got into my time at BYU, the more I saw like my peers also being frustrated, even like ones who were still really in the church, like believed in the church, just being frustrated with the institution itself. Like I think when BYU made the change that faculty need to have a temple recommend.
Oh, when was that?
I mean, I think it's pretty recent. Maybe
Yeah,
like a year
I mean,
or
it was
two
within,
ago.
okay, yeah.
But that was really frustrating to me, and I think to a lot of other students, because it's like, we came here because we were told we're going to get a good education at BYU. And now you're limiting who can teach us. My sister was at the law school, and that was like a big thing there, I guess, is a lot of the law professors
didn't have active temple recommends.
But they're amazing professors, so they just lost like so many resources.
Yeah.
And that's like, I feel like we're going to see that more and more, where it's just like, if BYU can only hire from such a small demographic, I don't know. I think it hurts our education.
It does, absolutely. And it's also, to your professor's point about BYU becoming more conservative, this is kind of my fear right now with Mormonism generally, is it feels like as Mormonism gets an increasingly bad reputation, in my opinion, the way that the church proper is responding is by clamping down, by trying to keep people more in line, by doing things like that, making standards higher for someone to teach at BYU. And then you're weeding out diversity of thought, even amongst an already very limited pool of diverse thinking, because you have to at least be somewhat Mormon, right? Or were at some point. And then, that's already going to limit hugely the racial demographic of the school. It's going to limit a lot of things already, but then they're trying to make it even tighter and trying to rein it in, especially when we're talking about an academic institution.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so antithetical to academia. I remember thinking that even still as a believing Mormon, we would often, I think, run into this wall where it's like, if you really believe the Mormon church and you believe all the things of the Mormon church are true, literally, you can only get so far with your thinking when you're discussing philosophies and literature and design. No matter what it is, it's very limiting, and it's scary to think that they're trying to limit that even further.
Yeah, exactly.
And you felt like people on campus, students, were expressing that frustration as well.
Yeah, I think a lot. And it always surprised me when it was people who were still really believing in the church, which I saw a lot. I mean, at least again, my major is maybe not the norm, but yeah, I mean, people were really frustrated about it.
So you would see active members of the church attending BYU expressing frustration with BYU specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you also think about that age demographic, like you were saying, with a lot of people coming into themselves, figuring things out about themselves and what they do believe. And even people who are maybe somewhat moderate might start getting, it might be backfiring.
Yeah.
I was curious to ask you if you think that your leaving of the faith was expedited by being at BYU. Do you think BYU contributed to your leaving?
I do. And it's hard to say because, I mean, that's the only thing I experienced.
Sure.
But I feel like even those thoughts I had when I first started BYU, this place is kind of homophobic and not inclusive. Just little things like that, just started adding up. And I think because the church is so ingrained in it, even in a religion class, we'd be learning about some doctrine. I'm thinking critically about this now. I'm getting a college degree while learning about the Mormon church, and some things just aren't working together. I mean, it's hard to say, but I definitely would guess that it was expedited.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that backfire effect because I know a lot of people, for me, I think my mission was really, it's always difficult to say, as you know, but I see the biggest seeds of doubt were planted for me on my Mormon mission. It can backfire when the church is trying to really get people in this pipeline, go to BYU, go on a mission, get married in the temple, thinking that that will keep people in. When in reality, I almost feel like people who just went to University of Utah, because that's where their dad went, and they didn't even touch BYU religion classes, they still could be part of a sorority or a fraternity. Then they've just kind of remained more middle ground Mormons because they weren't in that pressure cooker where it's so much Mormonism,
Yeah. Well, and that's why I kind of think in high school and stuff, I never really questioned things. I kind of just went along with it because I was in this household where my parents we'd go to church, but it was kind of you have the freedom to do what you're going to do. Yeah, I'll go to church and I'll do these things. And it wasn't until I was in a place where there were consequences if I didn't do this that I was I don't think I like this.
Yeah. The like authoritarian thing backfires.
Yeah.
As I think for like a lot of people it would. It's like no one likes that feeling. No one likes feeling monitored. Yeah, you're in college, but you're a grown-ass woman. Like, why are you having to go shake this old man's hand you don't even know to be like, I'm here so that you can get an education? It just starts becoming, I think, really clear in those type of situations, like where it's not working. How do you feel like it was amongst your fellow classmates and the students at BYU? And you've talked about this a little, but you were mentioning that you've opened up about this because you feel like you were lucky to have like a pretty good support system. What was it like deciding who to tell that you no longer believed, that you were dating women? How was it navigating that?
From the start, I had people like friends who before me had already come to me with similar things. So like then the other way around, I was like, okay, I know you're safe to go to. So I feel lucky for that. I think at the beginning, I played it very safe. I just like laid low. I pretended like I was in it, especially with dating women. Like I was not telling people, like even like pretty close friends. I was like, I'm not risking it. But then I think as it went on, I was like, I feel like I'm living like so inauthentically. And the more I was telling different people, I was surprised, I guess, how accepting a lot of BYU students were. I mean, by the time I graduated, every single one of my classmates knew about my girlfriend. And I mean, I was somewhat vocal, so probably how I felt about the church. And even pretty conservative classmates were like so kind and accepting to me. And I knew they weren't going to like out me.
Yeah, like even believing Mormon classmates.
Yeah.
Wow, that is really encouraging to hear. Tell me, I don't know exactly how this works, but if, say, a classmate found out you had a girlfriend, couldn't they just call the honor code office? So for people who don't know, we've talked about the ecclesiastical endorsement stuff, but the honor code it's such a stupid name. I have not actually considered how stupid of a name that is until this very moment. The honor code. That's like what they call it at BYU.
Yeah.
And that's basically just the code of conduct you have to follow, which includes basically just the Mormon commandments. So you have to keep the word of wisdom, but it also says something explicitly about, I should have looked up the exact language, but you can't be dating someone of the same sex.
Yeah,
I'm sure is like what it says. So that would be grounds for getting kicked out of the school because that's like what you're agreeing to do to attend BYU. So theoretically, if someone found out you had a girlfriend, they could report you, correct, to the honor code office.
Yeah.
And then you could get kicked out of the school.
Yeah, which was always a concern. I think by like my last year, and maybe it was me just wanting to like be defiant a little bit, I was like, I don't even care. If someone does it, do it. Which, not if it had actually happened, I would have probably had a breakdown.
Sure, but I mean, you probably get to a point where it's too much energy to like, I mean, even you saying that when you first started dating someone, you felt like you couldn't even tell your close friends. That's devastating.
Yeah.
That's not okay. To feel like you aren't allowed to just live your life and tell people close around you because they could go tell someone or they could go tell the honor code office. Like, that's really intense.
Yeah, it was really tricky at first, and I think it was a nice relief to just kind of like start doing it anyways. And I think I'm lucky in that no one said anything. After me and my girlfriend had been dating for like a year, it felt like a really natural next step for us to move in together. But that was, I mean, I still had a year at BYU, so I was like, I don't know how to go about this. But it kind of got to the point where I was like, I can't like let these rules, like I see this relationship lasting the rest of my life. I can't let like these BYU rules hurt that, like hurt something that's going to be the rest of my life.
So you lived with your girlfriend for the last year.
Yeah.
So you were living together on campus housing or off campus housing
we were
at that
off
point?
Campus, yeah.
And did your girlfriend attend BYU?
No, she didn't, but we did meet as roommates.
Gotcha.
In Provo housing.
Gotcha.
So that was kind of an interesting
Thanks to
story.
BYU for that, right?
Thank you, BYU.
I just saw another couple who met on their mission, two women who just got married, because I've interviewed a couple. They're so lovely, Lola and Jaden, and they were mission companions and they fell in love.
That's so
I
amazing.
love it so much. It's like the most poetic fuck you to Mormonism
Literally.
I can possibly imagine. And your story feels like that too. Like, despite being, despite all the efforts to get you to conform, you found the love of your life while doing the BYU thing.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Well, and I met her because she was my freshman roommate's, like one of her high school friends. So I'm like, sometimes I regret going to BYU, but I'm like, well, I did meet the love of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. That's bold too, that you were living together, because I can assume that also came with an additional level of like maybe some secrecy with certain people and things like that. So when it came to we talked about that one ecclesiastical endorsement, but you probably had to get a couple others. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just have to lie, right? You just have to go in and lie.
It's just blatantly lying. And it's like, I don't want to be doing this. It doesn't feel good to be lying. It's like incredibly stressful. But it's like, what's the alternative? Are you gonna do? Like, especially like my last interview, I'm like, I graduate in a year. I'm quite frankly breaking like every honor code rule. But what do I do?
Yeah. I know. I actually had a friend who I can't remember why it happened this way, but she had one class left, like one of the capstone something left. So we were all graduated from BYU. She basically, I think she had walked and everything, but she didn't have her diploma. She wasn't officially done with all of her credits. And the timing worked out where she had to get an endorsement. And at this point, it was like, it feels like it would be me going to get an endorsement. Like, she was so far out of the church. And it sounds like you were too. Like, where you're really, it's not even like, yeah, okay, like I can kind of stretch this. Like, well, I do believe. It's like, no, the church is not true.
Yeah.
But you are I mean, what else was she going to do? She had one class left. So she had to get on a Zoom call. I think this was during COVID. And she just had to like do the thing. And she's like, it was awful. I hated it. And it pisses me off that that's the situation that you're put in. I would do the same thing 100 times over. And I just think the system is such a failure that it puts people in those positions where it's like, in order to get your degree, you just have to like go and do the charade of it all just to get through.
Yeah.
Did you have to go to church anymore, or did you have more lax leaders?
That one I really planned out pretty well. I just went to my parents' ward like a couple weeks before, and then I was about to go on an internship in France. So I like went to my home ward bishop and I was like, I'm living with my parents until I go on this internship. So it's just like, I'm here for a short time. Could you just like give me this? And he's like my parents' next door neighbor. So I think that too helped, where it's like, well, if he doesn't give it to me, that's so uncomfortable for him.
Yeah, he's probably okay, fine.
So that one was honestly not too bad. I do think the YSA bishops are a little bit more intense about it for whatever reason.
I bet.
But
yeah, I bet they take it more seriously. I bet. Something that I thought was so fascinating to me about that TikTok you put out, and I'll link that in the show notes, by the way, is how logistically you had to think through getting your ecclesiastical endorsement and like doing that game. And watching you speak about it, it was so interesting because I was like, oh my gosh, like I've thought about what it would be like to be at BYU and to not believe, and just like the dissonance, how tricky that would be. But I didn't think about how many logistical factors there are to consider. Can you share some of the things that, I mean, that's one of them, right? Of like what you did with the family ward.
Yeah.
Can you share some of the like logistical tips and tricks you picked up along the way?
Yeah, I like that you called it a game. I feel like it is such a game. I feel like I was totally like playing a character when I'd go to church. I think a big thing I would do is I played this really like feminine, innocent facade, which is so dumb that I was having to like do that. But you're dealing with like a 70-year-old man. Like, he thinks that's how girls are supposed to be. So I just like wear these little dresses. I do bows in my hair. And yeah, just I'd play like really like shy, and just, I mean, I think that was like the easiest way for me, because then it's like you don't really have to interact, but it's like it's because I'm shy.
And then you're not raising red flags.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so crazy hearing you say that, because I'm just reflecting on my whole Mormon upbringing and how I was so belligerent. And like I just was always like, this is, even when I believed it, I was always like pushing back, and it puts a target on your back.
Yeah,
I mean, that's an extreme way of saying it. And luckily I wasn't in a position like you were. I can see like, oh, that actually drew a lot more attention to me and a lot more criticism, where if you just pretend to be like a good Mormon girl who's like, yes, bishop, you're
Yeah.
probably going to get through a lot easier and you're not going to draw as much attention to yourself.
Yeah, which like honestly more power to you if you're going to like speak your mind. I wish I could have done that. But yeah, and I think it's like thinking through everything you say. Like I mentioned in my TikTok, if just like casually my bishop's like, "Oh, what do you do for work?" I'd always say my parents just like help me pay for things so I don't have to work while I'm in school. Because I mean, I did have a job, but I haven't paid tithing, and he can see that if he looks it up.
I didn't even think about that.
Just like little things like that, or like throwing in like I know a lot of people will say they work on Sundays, so I guess that doesn't work for the tithing, but that's like a casual like, hey, like by the way, like sometimes I get scheduled on Sundays, like just like thinking ahead, trying to like cushion,
just kind of like
whatever you can.
breadcrumbing things so you can be like, oh yeah, well, remember this or that.
Yeah.
No, I think you did. I hope you don't carry any sort of like guilt around playing that part, because I think you did what you needed to do,
Yeah.
you know? And like, especially being gay, like I want to talk a little bit more about that, just with all of it, with still attending BYU, with having to have these touch points with the church. What was that like as you are really stepping into that identity for the first time? Was there dissonance with that? Like, what did that feel like?
Yeah, that was like, I don't know, that was like the wildest thing, because I think everything else I felt like I could hide a little bit, but that felt important enough to me that I was like, this feels really terrible to hide. And it was so interesting because, I mean, my girlfriend doesn't go to BYU, so it's like she's completely free from it, and she was super understanding of like everything I had to do. But I don't know, just like going to church, or like even like casually in like classes, or even just like seeing the family proclamation everywhere, it's just like, this is all so, it's just so exclusive of me. And I know so many queer students at BYU. So I'm like, you're really excluding so much of your student population there.
Do you feel like they talk about it a lot on BYU campus? Like, would professors? I just feel like that's been such a, I mean, as it should be. I think that's something a lot of people struggle with in the church, is the church's treatment of the LGBTQ plus community, of the church's just blatant exclusivity in the doctrine. Do you feel like at BYU, you mentioned seeing the family proclamation, a lot of places, that's, for people who don't know, that's where they say marriage is between a man and a woman and all that shit. Do you feel like it was being consistently brought up? Like, what was the general vibe around that? Like, do you feel like people were going out of their way to like speak out against gay people? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I kind of feel like there's like two demographics that I came across. Like, there are ones that very much wanted to push the point that marriage is between a man and a woman, and they'd be very blatant about it.
Students, professors, or both?
Mostly like high up BYU, like devotionals, like things like that. I feel like those were the ones that were more like that. And as far as like professors and students, there was a lot of like kind of wishy-washy, where it's like, well, we support gay people, but this is the doctrine, where it's like, in some ways that almost feels worse, because it's like, I get that you're trying to like be inclusive, but what you're still saying is like, I can't go to your heaven with my girlfriend.
Yes.
Like,
it's almost more confusing, I can imagine. Exactly. Or more, I mean, I've heard from a lot of ex-Mormons, especially queer ex-Mormons, that sometimes progressive Mormonism can be the most triggering, because it's like, okay, I see that you're like trying maybe, but how can you do both of these things at one time?
Yeah. Well, and it is so interesting. So I'm like, I mean, I feel like when I was in the church, I was always decently progressive, but now that's so interesting. So I'm like, I can get in their heads. Like, I know what they're trying to say, and I know what they're like trying to get at, but it's like, but now I'm on the other side, and I'm realizing that I probably said things that were also so invalidating to people. And I think they just don't get that. Like, they're really trying to be inclusive, but you can't be.
Yeah. That's a compassionate take. I lived in that place for a long time too, where I was like, no, like I am an ally. I do support anyone living however they want. But then I had a friend who came out right after BYU, and I would say that to him, and he's like, okay, but you're going to church, you're paying your tithing, that's supporting an institution that directly says like, I won't make it to heaven. I don't get to go to heaven because I'm gay, and you get to because you're straight. And I do think, I hope for a lot of people that's more of a stepping stone toward like full no disclaimers acceptance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think for a lot of people that has to be. And maybe to what you were saying before, maybe for some professors, that's just the safest way that they can say.
Yeah.
Because who knows what those professors are actually thinking. I want to talk about your mental health, because you said you started experiencing anxiety, as I can only imagine, when you're having to go to church. What do you feel like it did for your mental health to have to keep going through BYU without believing in the church?
It was an overall negative on my mental health. I mean, I feel lucky that I always like had the ability to go to therapy. So I was always going to therapy and stuff, but it just, I mean, I'm going to school every day. I'm like completely surrounded by this. There's really no escaping it, especially at BYU, where it's like anyone could report you at any time. So it like, even when I'm on a walk around the neighborhood with my girlfriend, it's like you never feel completely safe. And I think just that feeling of like the ground could give out from under you at any time, it's just like really dysregulating. And I think like that's what I noticed, is like I was in fight or flight like constantly. And I think I had to realize that. And like, you know, I'm obviously still working on that, but it's just so dysregulating for your nervous system.
There's always a possibility
Yeah.
that someone could find out, report you, and then you have to like solve this huge, gigantic problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it'll be a
That
big
sounds
thing.
incredibly stressful. You've shared so much good advice, practical, philosophical, spiritual, all the things. But if you were speaking directly to someone who is currently at BYU and doesn't believe in the church anymore, what do you feel like your biggest piece of advice would be for them?
I think one, I would say, it sounds like maybe just like cliche, but like you're really not alone. Like you're not the only one. And I think that would be so hard to be in a place where you don't know exactly who else is at that point, but there are people and there's like resources to find them. And then the other thing I'd say is like do what's best for you. Like I think for me, staying at BYU was like, yes, it was hard mentally, but I could get through it. But I think if you're really at a point where like you're not safe and like you're really not doing well, like maybe you do take a step back and like it'll make things harder. But like I think you just have to do what's going to be best for you.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's what inspires me so much about your story is you did what was best for you. And you're like, it's going to be best for me to finish my education here. And so you did what you had to do. And I really admire that, because I also think it takes away the power of the church, because, you know, we've been talking about this kind of dissonance, I'm sure, of like having to lie when you're an honest person. You don't want to do that. But to me, that just delegitimizes the church. You know, it's like it lends legitimacy, I think, in some ways to the church to feel like, well, I have to tell my bishop the truth about these things. Like, no, you don't. You really don't have to. The church doesn't deserve that. And I think it's really inspiring, particularly at your age, as someone who left the church a couple of years after those years, because college years are tumultuous anyway. Like they really are. So I find it incredibly admirable that you chose to do what's best for you. And I think that's a great note that for some people, it might be the best thing to just like take the inconvenience and, you know, that might be what's ultimately best for them. But if people feel like, no, I can put my head down and get through, like do what you have to do, you know?
Exactly.
Like just do what you have to do. What's next for you? You've finally graduated and you are very recently graduated.
Yes,
So this
like
is
2
all
months.
so fresh for you. How does it feel to be graduated and be done with that?
It feels so nice. It's just simple things. Walking around the neighborhood holding hands, posting my girlfriend without any fear, just things like that. It feels so freeing. We're moving out of Utah next month, so we're both really excited about that. And then, yeah, I'll get a design job, and I'm just really excited to really live authentically.
Oh, I'm so excited for you. It really is. It's so sad to think that you couldn't just like post a photo with your girlfriend while you were at BYU. But it's so happy to think that now you can, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like, yeah, living that way, which I was thinking about this too, because I think it's a somewhat niche experience. I mean, I'm sure I hear from a lot of them. I know there are a lot of people at BYU who don't believe anymore, a lot of people at BYU who are closeted because they're at BYU. So I don't think it's all that niche of an experience, but I was also just thinking about why I'm so drawn to your story. And I think it's because anyone who's been a part of any high demand religion, at some point in our journey, I think we've been forced to pretend to some extent and forced to hide parts of ourselves, or at least like rein in parts of ourselves just in order to, get through until we could not have to do that anymore. And so even though I didn't have this exact experience as you, I do find it so relatable of thinking about those times of like just doing what you had to do and then how much sweeter the freedom is on the other side. I really, really admire you getting through it. And I sense from you, like you were saying this as we were voice memoing, but you were kind of saying like the faith stuff itself was more like a stepping into yourself. Mm-hmm, and you actually felt really good about most of that. It was just kind of the BYU stuff holding you down. And I just really find it very inspiring when people like know themselves that well, as someone who, I feel like it took me longer to come to that. So I think it's really cool. And I really respect it.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on Girls Camp. You mentioned, I will link your TikTok so people know where to find you. You did mention resources for people to find each other at BYU. I don't know how underground those are, so we don't need to talk about it right now. But I know there's probably people listening like, help me find. So I will get plugged into those. I'll share them in show notes if possible. If not, DM me and I can share with people through DMs because yes, definitely not alone. Thank you so much. Can't wait to see what happens for you next. And you're going to Knoxville, right?
Yes.
Tennessee?
Yes.
So exciting. So
yeah,
if there's any
excited.
Knoxville campers,
be our friends.
Yes, you have two lovely new neighbors. Thank you so much, Holly, again for coming to Girls Camp. And thank you everyone for listening. Bye.
GIRL